The Vesheri Dominion had ruled the Orion Arm for 3,000 years, and no one remembered a time before their empire existed. The great warships of the Dominion patrolled every star system, and every habitable world paid tribute to the High Sovereign on the throne world of Vexer Prime. The Dominion's philosophy was brutal and simple: kneel or die. And most species chose to kneel on the farming world of Ketha Prime. A young man named Sorrel woke before dawn to tend his family's fields. His people, the Kethani, had served the Dominion for 6 generations, and they had forgotten what freedom meant. Sorrel's grandfather sometimes whispered stories about the old days when the Kethani ruled themselves, but those stories felt like fairy tales. The reality was taxes and labor quotas and Dominion soldiers who could kill anyone they wanted without consequences. Sorrel walked through the purple grain that grew tall in his fields, and he thought about his future. He would work this land until he died, just like his father and his grandfather before him. He would marry a Kethani woman and have children who would also work this land. Nothing would ever change, because nothing could ever change. The Dominion was eternal and resistance was impossible. That morning, the Dominion tax collectors came to Sorrel's village. Their leader was a Vexeri officer named Torvin, who enjoyed his work far too much. The Vexeri were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms and eyes that showed no mercy. Torvin walked through the village square and announced that taxes would be doubled this season. When the village elder protested that the people would starve, Torvin simply shot him with his plasma pistol. Sorrel watched the elder fall, and he felt something burn in his chest. It was anger, but it was also despair, because there was nothing he could do. The Dominion had weapons and ships and soldiers beyond counting. What could farmers do against such power? Sorrel lowered his eyes and said nothing as Torvin's soldiers loaded half the village's harvest onto their transport ships. Far away at the edge of explored space, something was happening that would change everything. A Dominion patrol squadron detected unusual energy readings near an uncharted jump point. The patrol commander, a veteran named Crothan, ordered his ships to investigate. What he found made him laugh out loud. 5 small vessels had emerged from the jump point, and they were broadcasting signals in an unknown language. The ships were painted in blue and white colors, and they bore a strange symbol that looked like a blue sphere surrounded by leaves. Crothan had never seen anything like them, and he immediately recognized an opportunity. New species meant new slaves and new technology to steal on the bridge of the exploration vessel. Wanderer Captain Daniel Hayes studied the alien ships on his display screen. He was a tall man with brown hair starting to gray at the temples, and he had spent 20 years in the Terran Space Force. Before volunteering for this mission, the Terran Confederation had finally developed faster than light travel, and Hayes had been chosen to lead the first expedition beyond human space. His first officer, Commander Lisa Porter, stood beside him watching the same display. She was a practical woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped analyzing. The alien ships were taking an aggressive formation, and that told her everything she needed to know about their intentions. "They don't look friendly," she said quietly. Hayes nodded, but he believed in giving everyone a chance. "Open a channel, Lieutenant Brooks. Let's introduce ourselves." Kevin Brooks, the communications officer, worked his console, and soon a channel was open. Hayes straightened his uniform and spoke clearly into the microphone. He introduced humanity and the Terran Confederation and expressed hope for peaceful relations. He said that humans came as friends seeking trade and knowledge. He waited for a response. Crothan received the transmission on his command ship, and he could not believe what he was hearing. These soft-looking creatures with their tiny ships thought they could talk to the Dominion as equals. The Vexeri had conquered 100 species, and this new one would be no different. Crothan sent a response ordering the humans to surrender immediately or be destroyed. Hayes listened to the translation that the ship's computer provided, and his expression grew serious. He had hoped for better, but he had prepared for worse. The Terran Confederation had not survived 2 world wars and a nuclear standoff by being naive about the nature of conflict. Hayes looked at Porter and saw that she had already begun tactical preparations. "They're launching attack craft." Brooks reported from his station. 12 Dominion interceptors screamed toward the human fleet. Each one was armed with enough firepower to level a city, and their pilots were veterans of dozens of campaigns against lesser species. Crothan watched from his command ship, expecting the humans to panic or try to flee. Neither happened. Captain Hayes gave a single calm order: "Defend yourselves." The human ships moved with a speed and precision that shocked the Dominion pilots. Point defense systems originally designed to protect against asteroid impacts locked onto the incoming interceptors and opened fire. The first wave of Dominion ships exploded before they could even fire their weapons. The survivors tried to break off their attack, but the humans had already repositioned to cut off their retreating. 7 minutes, the battle was over, and 12 Dominion interceptors had been reduced to scattered debris. Not a single human ship had been damaged. Crothan stared at his tactical display and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. No species had ever defeated the Dominion so easily. He immediately sent a message to the High Council on Vexor Prime, warning them about this new threat. Then he ordered his remaining ships to withdraw to a safe distance. Captain Hayes did not pursue the fleeing Dominion vessels. Instead, he turned to Lieutenant Brooks and gave new orders: broadcast on all frequencies. Make sure everyone in this region of space can hear us. Brooks worked his console, and soon the Wanderer was transmitting on every channel it could reach. Hayes spoke again, but this time his words were not just for the Dominion. They were for everyone living under Dominion rule. "We are the Terran Confederation, and we come in peace, seeking friendship and trade with all peoples. But we will defend ourselves against any aggression. To the rulers of this space, we have no quarrel with you if you leave us alone. To the peoples living under their rule, hear this: you are not alone anymore." The message traveled across dozens of star systems, reaching billions of beings who had never known anything but Dominion oppression. On Ketha, Prime Sorrel was working in his fields when his grandfather called him into the house. The old man had kept a hidden radio for decades, waiting for something he could never explain. Now that radio was picking up a transmission from the Star. Sorrel listened to the strange voice speaking words of hope, and he felt something stir in his heart. He did not know who these Terrans were, or if they could really challenge the Dominion, but for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. The old man looked at his grandson and smiled because he recognized the look in Sorrel's eyes. It was the look of hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing in the universe. The news of the battle spread across Dominion space faster than any ship could travel, and by the time the official reports reached Vexor Prime, everyone already knew that something impossible had happened. A new species had defeated Dominion warships and had done so with ease. The High Council assembled in their great citadel to discuss this unprecedented crisis. High Sovereign Malachar sat upon his throne of black stone and listened as his admirals argued about what to do. Malachar was ancient, even by Vexari standards, and he had ruled the Dominion for 400 years. He had seen rebellions rise and fall, and he had crushed every threat to his power with overwhelming force. This new species would be no different, and Meryl Vexen, the commander of the Dominion fleet, urged caution. He pointed out that the humans had shown advanced technology and excellent tactics. Rushing into another battle without understanding their capabilities would be foolish. Better to gather intelligence first and then strike with certainty, but other voices on the council disagreed. They argued that showing weakness now would encourage rebellion throughout the Empire. The subjugated species were already hearing the human broadcast, and some were beginning to whisper about freedom. Every day that passed without a crushing response made the Dominion look weak. Malachar listened to all of this and made his decision. He would not send a small fleet that might be defeated again. He would build the largest armada in Dominion history and lead it personally. The humans would be destroyed, and their worlds would be burned to ash. Then, every species in the Orion Arm would remember why they feared the Dominion. While Malachar planned his war, the humans were busy making friends. Captain Hayes had moved his small fleet deeper into Dominion space, following signals from worlds that wanted to communicate. On every planet they visited, they found the same story. Species crushed under Dominion rule, dreaming of freedom, but lacking the power to fight. Commander Lisa Porter led the diplomatic efforts, and she proved to be remarkably good at it. She listened more than she talked, and she never made promises the Confederation could not keep. She told the truth even when it was difficult, and this honesty earned trust from species that had learned to expect lies from those in power. On Catha Prime, Porter met with a group of resistance leaders in a cave system, hidden deep beneath the mountains. Sorrel was among them, and he had already become an important voice in the growing movement. His grandfather had connected him with others who remembered the old ways, and together they had begun organizing in secret. Porter looked at the assembled Cathani and spoke plainly. "We cannot fight your war for you. The Terran Confederation is far from home, and we do not have the ships or soldiers to liberate every world under Dominion control. But we can give you the tools to fight for yourselves." Some of the Cathani looked disappointed, but Sorrel understood. True freedom could not be given as a gift. It had to be won through struggle and sacrifice. If the humans simply handed them liberation, the Cathani would never truly own it. They had to earn their freedom with their own hands. The humans began teaching the Cathani everything they knew. Engineers showed them how to build weapons from common materials and how to modify farming equipment into tools of war. Communications experts taught them how to encrypt messages and how to organize cells that could not be easily infiltrated. Dr. Nathan Cole, a xenobiologist, studied vexillary physiology and identified weaknesses that could be exploitable. Learned faster than anyone, and he had a natural talent for leadership that even he had not known existed. Within weeks, he had organized his village into a functioning resistance unit, and within months, he commanded operations across an entire region. His fighters struck Dominion supply convoys and freed prisoners from labor camps and disappeared into the wilderness before retaliation could arrive. The Dominion called them terrorists and criminals. The oppressed peoples of Catha Prime called them the Flame of Catha. And on every world where humans had made contact, similar flames were being kindled. Admiral Grace Mitchell arrived with reinforcements from Earth 6 months after first contact. She brought 50 warships and 10,000 Marines, and most importantly, she brought news. The Terran Confederation had voted unanimously to support the liberation of Dominion space. Humanity would not stand by while billions suffered under tyranny. Mitchell was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles, but she carried herself with an authority that made even the tallest vexillary nervous. She had commanded the defense of Earth during the resource wars, and she had never lost a fight. Now she would face the greatest challenge of her career. The Dominion's Grand Armada was nearly complete, and scouts reported that it numbered 10,000 ships. Malachar himself would command the fleet, and he intended to sweep through human space, leaving nothing but destruction behind. The odds were overwhelming, and any rational assessment would conclude that humanity had no chance, but humans had never been very good at rational assessments. When freedom was at stake, Mitchell gathered her officers and began planning their defense. They would not meet the Dominion fleet in open space, where numbers would decide the battle. Instead, they would choose the ground and force the enemy to fight on human terms. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks had been studying Dominion communications for months, and he had identified something crucial. The vexillary were supremely confident in their own superiority, and this made them predictable. They always attacked in the same formations, using the same tactics, because those tactics had always worked. They had never needed to adapt because no one had ever challenged them. Effectively, Commander Porter suggested something audacious. Instead of just defending themselves, the humans should broadcast the entire battle on open channels. Every subjugated world would watch in real time as humanity faced the Dominion Armada. If the humans won, it would shatter the myth of victory and invincibility forever. Mitchell smiled when she heard the idea. It was risky, but it was also exactly the kind of bold move that could change history. She approved the plan and ordered her fleet to prepare for the most important battle humanity had ever fought on. Ketha Prime Sorrel gathered his fighters and told them what was coming. The Dominion Armada would soon attack the humans, and the outcome of that battle would determine the fate of every species in the Orion Arm. If the humans won, the revolution would spread like fire across dry grass. If they lost, the Dominion would crush every spark of resistance with brutal efficient. Cicero looked at his people and saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw determination. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever happened, they would face it together, and they would never stop fighting until they were free or dead. There was no middle ground anymore. The day of battle approached, and across 1,000 worlds, billions of beings held their breath and waited. High Sovereign Malachar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and looked upon his armada with pride. 10,000 warships stretched across the void in perfect formation, and each one carried weapons capable of destroying worlds. This was the greatest military force the Dominion had assembled in 500 years, and it would crush the human threat once and for. Malachar was confident of victory because he had always been victorious. He had ruled the Dominion for 4 centuries through strength and fear, and no species had ever truly challenged his power. These humans were bold and their technology was impressive, but they were few in number and far from home. Mathematics alone guaranteed their destruction. The Armada entered the Verith Nebula, a region of sensor-scrambling gas clouds and hidden gravitational anomalies. Dominion scouts had reported that the human fleet was waiting somewhere within the nebula, but the interference made precise detection impossible. Malachar was not concerned because his ships outnumbered the enemy 20-1. Even if the humans had some advantage in the nebula, it would not matter against such overwhelming force. Admiral Grace Mitchell watched the Dominion fleet enter the nebula from the bridge of her flagship, the Liberty. She had chosen this location carefully after studying Dominion tactics for months. The nebula would limit the enemy's ability to coordinate their massive fleet, while favoring the smaller, more maneuverable human ships. It would also ensure that the battle unfolded slowly enough for the entire galaxy to watch. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks confirmed that all broadcast systems were active and that signals were being received across Dominion space. Billions of beings on hundreds of worlds were watching their screens, waiting to see what would happen. Many had never witnessed a real battle before, because the Dominion always censored such things. Today, they would see everything. Mitchell took a deep breath and gave the order to engage. Human ships emerged from hiding positions throughout the nebula and opened fire on the lead elements of the Dominion fleet. The Vexery formation immediately began to break apart as captains reacted to threats from multiple directions. This was exactly what Mitchell had planned. Commander Lisa Porter commanded a squadron of fast attack ships that darted through the chaos, striking vulnerable targets and withdrawing before the Dominion could respond. She had trained her crews relentlessly for this moment, and they performed flawlessly. Every attack was precise, and every withdrawal was perfectly timed. The Dominion ships could not adapt quickly enough. Lieutenant Amy Santos led a fighter wing through the heart of the enemy formation, and her pilots danced between massive Dominion battleships targeting engine cores and weapon systems. Santos was the best pilot in the fleet, and she had never lost a wingman in combat. Today, she pushed her skills to the absolute limit, weaving through defensive fire that would have killed anyone less. Talented weapons officer Derek Palmer coordinated the fleet's main batteries from his station on the Liberty, and he orchestrated the bombardment like a symphony. His targeting solutions accounted for the nebula's interference, and the movement of friendly ships, and the probable responses of enemy commanders. Every salvo landed exactly where it would do the most damage, but the Dominion fleet was vast, and even with all their advantages, the humans were taking losses. The destroyer Valor was overwhelmed by enemy fire and exploded with all hands. The cruiser Defiance suffered critical damage and had to withdraw from the battle. Mitchell watched the casualty reports scroll across her display, and she felt each loss like a wound to her own body. On Ketha Prime, Sorrel watched the battle on a hidden screen surrounded by his resistance fighters. They cheered when human ships destroyed Dominion vessels, and they fell silent when the casualties mounted. Sorrel understood that real people were dying out there fighting for a cause that was bigger than any individual. He swore that their sacrifice would not be wasted. Malachar grew frustrated as the battle dragged on. His superior numbers should have ended this quickly, but the humans kept slipping away and striking from unexpected angles. The Nebula played havoc with his communications, and his captains were making independent decisions that contradicted his orders. The Dominion fleet was designed for overwhelming frontal assaults, not this kind of chaotic engagement. The High Sovereign ordered his flagship to push forward into the heart of the nebula. He would find the human command ship and destroy it personally. His admirals warned him that this was reckless, but Malachar had never known defeat, and he could not imagine that these humans could truly threaten him. His arrogance had always been rewarded. Before Mitchell saw the Eternal Dominion break from formation, and she recognized the opportunity. She ordered all available ships to converge on the enemy flagship. If they could destroy Malachar, the Dominion fleet would lose its central command, and the psychological impact would be devastating. Every captain in her fleet understood what was at stake. The battle around the Eternal Dominion became the most intense fighting any human had ever experienced. Dominion escorts threw themselves between the flagship and the attacking humans, but Porter's squadron tore through them with ruthless efficiency. Santos led her fighters in strafing runs that disabled the flagship's defensive batteries one by one. Palmer directed concentrated fire from the Liberty that cracked the Eternal Dominion shields. Malachar watched in disbelief as his flagship began to die around him. Systems failed and fires spread, and crew members screamed as compartments decompressed. He had never imagined that this moment was possible. He had ruled for 400 years, and he had believed he would rule forever. Now he faced the reality that every tyrant eventually confronts. Power built on fear cannot stand against those who have conquered their fear. The final salvo from the Liberty struck the Eternal Dominion's reactor core, and the flagship exploded in a brilliant flash that was visible across the entire nebula. High Sovereign Malachar died in that moment, along with 10,000 Vexery crew members. The ruler who had crushed 100 species was gone in an instant across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched the explosion on their screens, and they understood what it meant. The Dominion was not invincible. The tyrants could be killed. Freedom was possible. The remaining Dominion ships fell into chaos without their commander. Some captains tried to rally their forces, but the humans pressed their advantage relentlessly. Within hours, the greatest armada in Dominion history had been shattered. Surviving ships fled in all directions, and the human fleet did not pursue them. Admiral Mitchell broadcast a final message as the battle ended, and her words reached every corner of Dominion space. The High Sovereign is dead, and his fleet is destroyed. The age of Dominion tyranny is over. To all peoples who desire freedom, rise up and claim it. You are not alone, and you never will be again. On Ketha Prime, Sorrel turned to his fighters and spoke the words they had been waiting to hear. It's time. Tonight we take back our world. The revolution had begun. The destruction of High Sovereign Malachar's armada sent shockwaves through every corner of Dominion space, and the empire that had seemed eternal began to crack. On 100 worlds, the oppressed peoples rose up against their masters and Dominion garrisons that had ruled through fear. suddenly found themselves surrounded by enemies who no longer feared them, Ketha Prime. Sorrel led his fighters against the Dominion Administrative Center in the capital city. The garrison commander Torvin was the same officer who had killed the village elder and burned the harvests. Sorrel had not forgotten, and neither had any of the Kethani who followed him into battle that night. The assault began at midnight when the twin moons of Ketha Prime cast long shadows across the city. Sorrel's fighters had spent months preparing for this moment, and they moved through the streets with deadly precision. They disabled communications towers, first cutting off the garrison from any hope of reinforcement. Then they attacked the barracks where the Dominion soldiers slept. Torvin woke to the sound of explosions, and he immediately understood that everything had changed. The Kethani, who had cowered before him for generations, were now breaking down his doors with weapons in their hands. He tried to rally his soldiers, but panic had already taken hold. Too many of them had seen the broadcast of Malakar's death, and they knew the Dominion could no longer protect them. The battle for the capital lasted 3 days, and when it was over, the Dominion flag no longer flew over Ketha Prime. Torvin was captured alive and brought before Sorrel, who had to decide what justice meant for his people. Some wanted immediate execution, but Sorrel chose differently. He ordered that Torvin be imprisoned and tried publicly so that everyone could see that the new Ketha would be ruled by law, not vengeance. Commander Lisa Porter arrived on Ketha Prime a week later with humanitarian supplies and technical advisors. She found Sorrel in the ruins of the administrative center trying to figure out how to run a government. He was an excellent warrior, but he had no experience with things like sanitation systems and food distribution and currency management. Porter smiled and said that was perfectly normal. Every revolution faces this challenge. Destroying the old order is the easy part. Building something better is where the real work begins. She introduced Sorrel to a team of human experts who would help the Kethani establish their new government. There were engineers to repair damaged infrastructure, and doctors to treat the wounded, and teachers to educate the children. Most importantly, there were advisors who understood how to create institutions that would last beyond any single leader. Similar scenes played out across Dominion space as world after world threw off the chains of oppression. Some transitions were peaceful, as Dominion garrisons simply surrendered when they realized resistance was futile. Others were violent and bloody, as centuries of hatred exploded into conflict. The humans helped where they could, but they could not be everywhere at once. On the Dominion homeworld of Vexer Prime, the remaining members of the High Council fought among themselves for control of what remained of the Empire. Without Malakar's iron will to unite them, the Vexeri leadership fractured into competing factions. Some wanted to sue for peace with the humans, while others demanded continued war. Some wanted reform, while others clung to the old ways. Admiral Grace Mitchell established a forward base in liberated space and prepared for whatever came next. She knew that the Dominion was not truly defeated yet. They still had ships and soldiers and weapons, and desperation could make them dangerous. She ordered her fleet to remain vigilant while also extending offers of negotiation to any Vexeri faction willing to talk. The months that followed tested everyone involved. Lieutenant Kevin Brooks worked constantly to maintain communications between dozens of newly liberated worlds that had never been allowed to speak to each other before. He helped establish a network that would eventually become the foundation of a new galactic community. Dr. Nathan Cole traveled from world to world, treating injuries and diseases that the Dominion had ignored for centuries. He trained local doctors and built medical facilities, and discovered that many species had healing traditions that could benefit humanity as well. The exchange of knowledge flowed in both directions. Lieutenant Amy Santos led patrol squadrons that protected convoys, bringing supplies to worlds in need. Pirates and Dominion loyalists threatened the shipping lanes, but Santos and her pilots were relentless. She lost friends in skirmishes that history would barely remember, but every convoy that got through meant thousands of lives saved. Weapons Officer Derek Palmer retired from combat duty and became an instructor teaching the next generation of officers how to fight. He had seen enough death, and he wanted to spend his remaining years ensuring that others were prepared for the battles to come. His students would eventually command fleets of their own, and they would carry his lessons with them. Captain Daniel Hayes returned to Earth to report to the Confederation government and to advocate for continued support of the liberation movement. Some politicians argued that humanity should focus on its own affairs and leave the alien species to sort themselves out. Hayes spoke passionately against this isolationism, reminding everyone that the Dominion would eventually recover and threaten humanity if it was not dealt with. Now the debate was fierce, but in the end, the Confederation voted to establish permanent ties with the liberated worlds. Trade agreements were negotiated and mutual defense pacts were signed, and for the first time in galactic history, a community of free peoples began to take shape. They called themselves the Galactic Commonwealth, and Earth was invited to be a founding member. On Ketha Prime, Sorrel stood before the newly elected Parliament and delivered his final address as revolutionary leader. He had never wanted political power, and he did not intend to keep it. The Kaveni had chosen their own representatives through free elections, and those representatives would govern from now on. Sorrel would return to his farm and grow purple grain like his grandfather had done before. He left the capital. Sorrel met with Lisa Porter one last time. She had become a true friend during the long months of struggle, and he wanted to thank her properly. He gave her a small carved figure made from Kethany wood representing a farmer looking up at the stars. Porter accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. She said that she would keep it forever as a reminder of what they had accomplished together. She said that Sorrel had shown her what real courage looked like, and that she was honored to have known him. The war was not truly over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Dominion was dying, and something new was being born in its place. The universe would never be the same. 20 years had passed since the destruction of the Dominion. Amada and the Varath Nebula and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Commonwealth now spanned 300 star systems and included 47 different species, all working together as equals. Wars still happened and conflicts arose, but there was a framework for resolving disputes without genocide. Sorrel stood on the balcony of the Kethany Parliament building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His hair had turned white, and his face showed the marks of time, but his eyes remained sharp and clear. He had spent the last 2 decades building the world his grandfather had dreamed about, and he was proud of what his people had accomplished. Below him, the capital city bustled with activity as Kethany and visitors from a dozen other worlds went about their daily lives. Markets sold goods from across the Commonwealth, and children played in parks that had once been Dominion administrative compounds. The statue of the village elder that Torvin had murdered stood in the central square, reminding everyone of the price of freedom. A transport shuttle descended from orbit, and Sorrel smiled when he saw the Terran Confederation markings on its hull. He had been expecting this visitor for several weeks, and he was looking forward to seeing an old friend again, Lisa. Porter emerged from the shuttle, walking slowly with a cane, but still carrying herself with the dignity that Sorrel remembered. Her hair was completely gray now, and her face was lined with age, but her eyes sparkled when she saw him waiting. They embraced like the old friends they were, and neither spoke for a long moment. "You look good for a farmer," Porter said finally. Sorrel laughed and gestured at the Parliament building behind him. "They won't let me stay on the farm. Every time I try to retire, they find some new crisis that only I can solve. I'm beginning to think they just like having me around." They walked together through the Parliament Gardens as the sun continued its descent. Porter told Sorrel about changes on Earth and developments in the Commonwealth and the latest news from the frontier, where human explorers were still discovering new species. Some of those species needed help escaping their own tyrannies, and the Commonwealth was always willing to lend a hand. Sorrel listened and asked questions and shared his own thoughts on how the Cathani were adapting to their role in the galactic community. His people had gone from slaves to senators in a single generation, and the adjustment had not been easy. Many older Cathani still struggled to believe that their freedom was real and permanent. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your ships had never come through that jump point? Sorrel asked as they sat on a bench overlooking a fountain. Porter considered the question carefully before answering. Sometimes, but I think freedom was always inside your people, waiting for the right moment to emerge. We just gave you the opportunity to express what was already there. The courage was yours. The sacrifice was yours. The victory was yours. Sorrel nodded slowly because he had come to believe something similar over the years. The humans had provided weapons and knowledge and support, but the Cathani had done the fighting and dying. They had earned their freedom through their own blood, and that made it real in a way that liberation from outside never could have been. That evening a celebration was held in honor of the 20th anniversary of the Battle of Varith Nebula. Representatives from every Commonwealth world gathered in the grand hall that had once served as the Dominion Governor's throne room. Admiral Grace Mitchell attended despite her advanced age, and she received a standing ovation that lasted several minute. Speeches were given honoring those who had fallen in the struggle for freedom, and Sorrel listened to each one with deep emotion. So many had died so that others could live free, and their names were inscribed on monuments across 100 worlds. The greatest tribute to their sacrifice was the thriving civilization that had risen from the ashes of the Dominion. Captain Daniel Hayes spoke about the original mission of the exploration fleet and how first contact with the Dominion had forced humanity to choose between safety and justice. He said that choosing justice had been the defining moment of human history, and that he was proud to have played a small part in what followed. Lieutenant Amy Santos, now Admiral Santos and commander of the Commonwealth Defense Force, spoke about the ongoing mission to protect the peace they had won. Threats still existed and vigilance was still necessary, but the Commonwealth was strong and growing stronger every year. She promised that the sacrifices of the past would never be forgotten. Dr. Nathan Cole spoke about the medical advances that had come from cooperation between species and how diseases that had been death sentences were now easily curable. He described hospitals on worlds that had never known proper health care and children who were alive because the Commonwealth had brought them medicine and hope. The final speaker was a young Cathani woman named Sarah, who had been born 3 years after the liberation. She had never known Dominion rule, and she could not truly understand what her parents and grandparents had suffered. But she understood what freedom meant, and she was determined to protect it for the next generation. Sarah spoke about the future and the challenges that lay ahead. The Commonwealth was not perfect, and there were still injustices to correct and problems to solve. But the foundation was solid, and the principles were sound, and the will to continue building a better galaxy was strong. She thanked the humans for everything they had done, and she promised that the Cathani would always stand with them. After the speeches ended, Sorrel found himself alone on the balcony, again looking up at the stars. So many of those distant points of light now represented free worlds where people lived without fear of oppression. It still amazed him sometimes when he remembered the hopeless young farmer he had been. Porter joined him on the balcony, and they stood together in comfortable silence. The night was warm, and the sounds of celebration drifted up from the city below. Somewhere out there, human ships were still exploring and still finding new peoples who needed help. The mission that had begun with Captain Hayes and the Wanderer continued without end. "Do you have any regrets?" Porter asked Quiet Lisserel, thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the friends he had lost and the terrible things he had done in the name of freedom. He thought about the years of violence and the scars that would never fully heal. But he also thought about his grandchildren playing in fields that no Dominion soldier would ever burn. "No," he said finally. "I would do it all again, exactly the same way. Every moment of pain was worth it for what we built together." Porter nodded and smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you would say." They watched the stars together as the celebration continued below them. The Empire's rule had been shattered by power, but it was not the power of weapons that had truly broken the Dominion. It was the power of hope and courage and the unshakable human belief that every thinking being deserved to be free. The Terrans had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Somewhere in the darkness, new explorers were setting out on missions that would take them to the edge of the unknown. They carried with them the same message that Captain Hayes had broadcast so many years ago. "You are not alone anymore," and across 1,000 worlds, free peoples looked up at the stars and smiled because they knew it was true.